Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back. It's Wednesday, November the 11th, and happy Veterans Day to anybody who's here on Veterans Day or watching it on this date. Um, about 3 minutes until the official class time, so for now, just welcome. I hope you guys are doing well. And we have another key lecture coming right up. Hi, Eva. Good morning. Hey, Drew. Good morning. How are you? Welcome back, everybody. Just another minute or so until ready to start. Aging. Hey, girl, Peach. All right, guys. Well, it's more or less class time now, 9 a.m. So welcome back. Thank you for being here. And let me just start by asking one quick question. Just in the last hour, I think I mailed to you guys the upcoming prompts for the second essay. Has anybody received it or can tell me that you saw the note? And it's a Canvas announcement to the class. Okay, good. So Megan, everyone then has got it. So those are the upcoming prompts. There's three choices. Just as in the first essay, you have your options. You could choose whichever one of the three that you wanted to report on, but you would only pick one, not more than one. And there's three just different topics. So one is epistemology, one is philosophy of time, and one is philosophy of mind that we're now sort of getting into. So it sort of just depends on which topic that you find the most interesting or that you feel like you could most accurately and clearly discuss. Of course, if you wanted to work on the first prompt, I would advise that you maybe delay for just a moment the beginning of the work because we're just now starting on the philosophy of mind, and so you probably want to get a few of the lectures under your belt if that's the one that you think you might be most interested in or whatever. So anyway, it's not due for a little while. It's due on December the 4th. If I'm correct, well, it'll be the 13th on Friday. Let's see what goes from there, 20th, 20. So it's over 3 weeks away. We have a whole Thanksgiving week as just a holiday week, so you have a little more time to work on it because of that. But anyway, yeah, I want to spend a little more time just going over each prompt and talking about the details on Friday, I think, because I just wanted to get right back into our lecture today on Descartes and dualism. But I thought, I'll just provide them to you now so you can get started at least collecting your thoughts, getting your notes together, and at least considering which of the prompts you might want to work on. But anyway, the class keeps moving on. You've got your second essay prompts. Other than that, the only thing left at the end will be the final exam. And just as we did in midterm, I'll make sure to give you guys your study guide for the final. We'll do some review sessions, and we'll get you prepared for the test on the last day during our scheduled final time. Okay, so I don't know. Everything's good on that. Hopefully we're all clear, at least for now. If you do have any questions or anything else, please just let me know. You can always ask me either here or by email or during office hours that I always hold on Friday. Okay, so just now we've got that announcement. Okay, so back to our current topic and the first author on this new topic. So we are now moving on into the subject of the philosophy of mind. And the philosophy of mind, as I was saying, is all about consciousness, perception, experience, and what is the nature of consciousness? How does it, exist? What's the foundations or basis of it? Some people think that consciousness is totally just physical, that it's just the brain, and that everything from thinking, feeling, perceiving is just the physical brain. Those would be physicalists, and they think, that their version of monism. Monism says that everything in the universe is made out of just one kind of substance. Now, some monists are physicalists, and they think the only substance that makes everything is matter, physical matter. So matter makes all things, including me and you, and the most fundamental unit of matter would be the atom. Another kind of monist is the idealist. Idealist monism says that there's, only one substance that makes everything, but it's not physical matter, it's just thoughts, or it's mental. So they would argue that there's no physical objects, there's just thoughts all around, and God is the thinker when you're not able to be perceiving or thinking of the thing. But anyway, we are mostly interested in the physicalist version of monism in comparison with dualism. So dualism embraces both of the substances and says that there's both, so there's two substances that make all of reality, physical matter, but also the mind. Now about those two substances, just as a recap, the substance referred to as matter is thought of as anything that's extended in space. So taking up space, having some mass, some volume, some weight, that's a piece of matter. And again, the most primary unit of that would be the atom. So matter is one of the optional substances. The other is the mind. So mind in the philosophical description is something that does not have any extension in space. So it's not a tiny little pebble or a tiny little bit of matter. No, the mind is thought of as something that's literally not extended in space. So it's not physical in any way, but it somehow is thinking. So it's something more along the lines of like a soul, like a pure consciousness without any physical basis. Okay, and so dualists are those who say that there's both of these substances in reality. Physical objects, bodies, etc., they're made out of matter, but the mind is something that is not material, and it's just a consciousness without extension in space. Okay, so we're now going to investigate the arguments given by people who are dualists or who are physicalist monists. And the first author on this is our friend René Descartes. Okay, so Descartes, as we've studied him one time, we already know a little bit about him. He lived from 1596 to 1650. And he wrote the important book called The Meditations in 1641. Okay, so we have already one time looked at some of the material from Descartes. We studied the first two chapters of the Meditations back when we were looking at epistemology. So Meditation 1 and 2, those are the first two chapters. There's 6 chapters in the book, and they go in that order: Meditation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So as we study the first two meditations, I'll just remind you of what was going on there. Descartes says, this book is being written because I want to find out what is certain. I'm looking for certainty. I'm looking for something that could never be doubted. Why does he want to find out what is certain? Because as he sees science and academic knowledge kind of expanding rapidly during his lifetime, he thought that it should all be set down on a solid foundation, meaning that we must have first principles that are totally certain, that could never be doubted. Otherwise, our growing body of scientific and academic knowledge might be placed on a shaky foundation that'll later on have to be pulled out from under it. So let's get let's take our best first steps and make sure that we put a right foot forward, that the foundations of knowledge are totally certain and secure. Okay, so we're looking for certainty, how to get there. Use the method of doubt. The method of doubt says to assume that things are false if there's any possible way they could be. And if this method of doubt eliminates all the things that can be doubted, then whatever is left over after the method would be the things that cannot be doubted, which is what he's looking for. Using the method of doubt, it was noticed that you can doubt almost everything, including everything that you perceive with your five senses, because whatever you see, taste, touch, hear, or smell is something that could also be just an illusion seen or experienced within a dream. So because of the possibility of widespread just dreams or simulations or whatever, we can't necessarily say that the five senses are telling us the truth. Even math and logic, he says, can be doubted because there's a possibility of an external deceiver like an evil demon causing errors about those. But there's this one thing that can't be doubted. That's just sort of the last thing I wanted to remind you about meditation 1 and 2. But maybe someone here watching this will tell me, what was it, the one thing that Mr. Descartes said is it's impossible to doubt it? It doesn't even make logical sense to doubt it. What is this one thing that is certain? Okay, good, Eva, your own consciousness. That is known to exist. The fact that you exist is certain just because you're thinking. So as long as you're considering any type of question, including the question, do I exist, that very cognitive activity of thinking about it just proves that you do exist. So one thing that can't be doubted, at least by you yourself, is your own existence. So this bypasses the method of doubt. Okay, well now we are towards the end of his book. That's the lesson today. Today's discussion is about the final chapter of his book called Meditation 6. Meditation 6 from Descartes' Meditations. So here in the end of the book, he's basically finally coming back to the everyday common sense view of the world that we usually take for granted. That yes, the external world exists, and I'm not just dreaming, and the things that I perceive are basically accurate to the reality. And along the way, in the sixth meditation, he also gives an argument for dualism, the argument that the mind and the body are not the same thing, but that they're two separate things. Okay, so I'm going to try and present for you Descartes' argument for dualism, which is found in the sixth meditation, but it's a very detailed argument and there's a lot of steps in it, so we're just going to take it slow. Okay. Okay, so Descartes' argument for dualism. Okay, so some of what I'm going to explain right now are ideas that emerge in the interim between the second meditation and the sixth. And if we just read the sixth meditation in our book, he makes indirect reference to pretty much all of these points, but I'm trying to bring them together in a clearer statement of the argument than perhaps the scattered comments that you would find just in the text itself. So bear with me, I'm reconstructing the argument of Descartes a little bit to make it a little bit more digestible for you. The exact premises that I'm writing here are not like the same exact way he describes it. He doesn't say, here's premise 1, here's premise 2. He just gives you a big, broad discussion. And I'm basically refining that a little bit, making it a little bit more presentable, and trying to streamline it. So I'm giving you Descartes' argument with some clarification added, okay? So the argument has a bunch of steps, and in an argument, the steps are called premises. The premises are the evidence or the reasons which eventually lead us to a conclusion. So this argument has a lot of premises that get us to that ultimate conclusion, but we'll start with the first one. So the first premise of the argument given by Descartes for dualism is this. Based on the method of doubt, I'm able to doubt everything perceived by my five senses, and even math and logic. So we're just beginning the description of the argument with the premise here, which is telling us that, reminding us that the method of doubt, which was used in this book, the method of doubt allows us to doubt, everything we perceive by the five senses. Why? Because it could be a dream. It's also capable of allowing us to doubt even the things about math and logic that we think we know, because of the possibility of an evil demon or some malicious deceiver like that. Okay, so just opening with what the method of doubt allows us to have doubt about. Those things, everything from the five senses, even conceptual truths from like formal sciences of math, logic, or geometry. But second premise then, despite what is said in the first premise, despite this, I know for sure that I exist as a thinking mind because I'm thinking. Okay, so okay, so the first two steps of the argument mention what you can doubt. First premise, what you can doubt according to this method. You can doubt everything you perceive with the five senses. You can even doubt math and logic. The second premise then kicks in and just says, but on the other hand, there's one thing that can't be doubted, as we've discussed. And that one thing is the knowledge that you have that you exist. And I mentioned here in the parentheses, as a mind, because you're not yet certain that your body exists, since that's something that is perceived by the senses. But you know at least that you're some kind of mind, some kind of consciousness, just because of the fact that you're thinking. So that's something that remains totally certain, regardless of the method of doubt. Okay, so from here, there's so many steps in the argument that I'm going to have to repeatedly clear the board to add further premises. So you've seen the first two. Hopefully those have been clear enough. I'm going to erase, and we're moving to the third premise. Okay, so I know at this point in the argument that I exist as a mind, if nothing else, because I'm thinking. From there, the next point is to mention, well, what are some of the things that are in this mind? You're a mind thinking, at least. Well, in the mind that you have, there are ideas, including the idea of God, okay? So that's the third premise. In my mind, there are ideas, including the idea of God. Including the idea of God. So I'm going to frequently go back to the beginning and take us towards the current part of the argument we are in. But if we look back at our steps so far, it starts with, there's a method of doubt which allows me to doubt almost everything, but one thing that can't be doubted based on that is that I know I exist, at least as a mind, because I'm thinking. So with regard to this mind that I have, which is thinking, it has ideas. And I'm going to call one of these ideas out for special mention, and that is the idea of God. Okay, so now he's going to tunnel in on this idea of God a little bit more, which is in our mind. He says, the idea of God is special, it's unique, it's different from all other ideas that are in your mind. Because this one idea of God is the one and only idea of something that is an infinite being. Okay, so that's the point to mention here on premise 4. The idea of God is special, it's unique, it's unlike all the other ideas because it is the idea of an infinite being. Okay, so far all I can say for sure is I exist and that I have a mind that thinks. But if we consider what is in the mind, there are ideas. One of those ideas, among others, is the idea of God. But that idea stands alone. It's unique, it's distinct from the others because it is the idea of an infinite being. The idea of anything other than God is not the idea of an infinite being. The idea of anything else is the idea of something finite with limitations, etc. But the idea of God is infinite. So from here, he uses this point that we have an idea of God, which is the idea of an infinite being. He uses that as kind of leverage to establish a further claim. Okay, so now let me try my best to explain the next step to you before I write the premise on the board. When I was a student back at UCLA learning Descartes, I remember having been told this kind of example, and it really helped me understand what Descartes was saying, so I'm going to try my best to give the same example to you. Okay, it's almost like a little bit of a math problem. So here we have two containers, all right? This is container A, okay? And over here, there is container B. Now, suppose that we know that in container B, down here, there is 1 gallon of water in it, all right? And all we know is this, that the measurement of 1 gallon, that is the content of container B, it has received that volume of water from container A. Okay, so pretty simple, right? B gets the water deposited into it from A. And right now, B is holding a gallon. Okay, so I want you to simply tell me this. The carrying capacity of container A, if it is the receptacle, which is the source of whatever B is now holding, then the load carrying capacity of A, it must be a greater than or equal to what? If A has imparted a gallon to B, then logically we must know that if A is the source of B's content, then it has to have greater than or equal to 1 gallon of carrying size, right? It makes no sense to say that A is a half-gallon container and that is how B got a gallon. That would not be mathematically possible because it has to at least have the space and size to give what is received in B. Okay, so if we just know that B got this 1 gallon from A, it's I hope abundantly obvious that A therefore must be at least a gallon in size or more. Okay, so now me and you are like these, by metaphor, okay, kind of like these containers. So now in your mind, there's this idea of God. I just write idea of God. That's kind of small, but that's what it does say inside. This idea of God is coming from somewhere, and it's in your mind, which is like the container of the idea, okay? But how much reality did the author say the idea of God has? He says the idea of God is what kind of idea? It's the idea of something that is what? Just let me know if you can remember this or even just judge what you think that is. It's clear, I hope, but the idea of God, he says, anyway, in the argument, is the idea of a certain type of being. What kind? Unique and standalone, correct, Megan, but a little more precise. What is it about it that's unique? That it's infinite, right? That's the thing that's infinite, that's the thing that's unique, being the infinite being. Okay, so we have an idea of God, but this idea that we have of him is an infinite thing. It's the idea of something infinite. So like how much reality is in this idea? It's an infinite amount. That's the infinity symbol. So we're getting this idea from somewhere, right? He says we are finite minds, and therefore the idea of some infinite being can't come from us. It has to come from some external source. But now borrowing the model of the two containers where the bottom one has a gallon, well, if we are the so-called container with an idea in our head of something infinite, then this must have come down from a source that has to be at least how much reality or more. If we have an idea of an infinite being, then where in the world could it come from, basically? It has to come from something which is at least what? Can we synthesize these points and see if you can tell me what my answer is here? Since the idea of God is the idea of something infinite, and it is caused by some source external to you, then the source of the idea must also be at least what? Infinite. Correct, Megan. Now, as you say that, I hope it makes sense to you, and it's not just I'm saying it because I think that's what he wants me to say. It's hopefully clear because you have an idea in your mind which holds infinite reality, as the argument is claiming anyway. And if this is coming from something, it cannot come from something with less than infinite reality, because then the source would have less reality than what the effect is that it passes on. Okay, that he's saying that would be just as impossible as here's a container with a gallon in it, and it has received that 1 gallon from a half-gallon container. That's not possible, okay? So since the idea left with you is the idea of something infinite, it has been caused by a source which is itself infinite. So, okay, if the cause of your idea of God is something infinite, then basically he thinks that this proves that what exists. You know, there's a cause of your idea of God, and it has to be something infinite, which essentially, in his view, is a proof that what thing exists. Can you deduce this? You have the idea of God, it's infinite, it's caused, therefore, by something infinite, but now we're talking about the cause of your idea being something infinite. What would that thing be then? The cause of the idea of God can only be, no, Drew, no. It's caused by something outside of you. I already said you have a finite intellect, so you can't come up with the idea of something infinite on your own. Yes, it's coming down from God himself, because God is the infinite being, which is the source of your idea of him. And if God didn't exist, there would never be a way for you to have such an idea, because it could never have been caused by something that is itself finite. Okay? So, we all clear? You have an idea of God, but it's a different type of idea than other ones because it's the idea of something infinite. Now, whatever caused this idea to happen in your mind must itself be something infinite. And that is just God itself. Okay, so now we can go on in the argument, now that I've given this explanation. The fourth premise was that the idea of God is unique because it's the idea of an infinite being. The fifth premise just continues from there by saying the cause of this idea must be something that has infinite reality, and therefore God exists. Okay, so far the argument has led us to the existence of God, but it's still not done. There's a few further steps from here. We're just taking stock of the argument right now, midway through. It starts off by saying, hey, there's a method to doubt, and if we use it, we're pretty much going to doubt almost everything. Everything that you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, all the 5 senses. It could all be a dream. Even math, logic, geometry, trigonometry, those things could also be doubted if if there were a malicious demon or something. But one thing that is impossible to doubt, even with the method of doubt, is the existence of yourself. You know you exist, if not as a body, then as a mind at a minimum, because you are thinking. So let's go on and consider, well, if you're a mind, one thing we know about you is that you have ideas. And one of these ideas is kind of different from all the others, kind of special idea of the idea of God. Why is it different? Because it's the idea of an infinite being. Now, if we start to consider what could be the source, the cause that led to this idea in your mind of God, well, since the idea is the idea of something infinite, the cause of the idea must also be something infinite. Otherwise, it would not have enough reality to cause an infinite idea. That means that there's something that causes your idea of God, which is in itself infinite, and that thing just is God. So now we're at the point in the argument where he believes he has proven the existence of God. It's kind of almost a little bit like a modified version of the ontological argument, because the form of the argument is, I have an idea which is so great that it has to correspond to something real that is just as great as the idea is. But anyway, however you prefer to consider it, it's a proof so far that God exists, but there's a few more steps. Okay, so moving to the next premise, step 6. Okay, so God exists. Now, the 6th premise uses that idea that God exists as the leverage to make a further inference. So if God exists, God is known to be all good. He's known to be omnibenevolent, which means that he is not a deceiver. Okay, so once we prove the existence of God, and you think a little more about the concept of God, God is known as some being that is perfectly good, all good, infinitely good, omnibenevolent. So if God is omnibenevolent, all good, that means that he is not a deceiver. To deceive, to trick, to manipulate, to lie, to conceal the truth is not good. It's bad. Since God is infinitely good, he wouldn't want to, and he would not deceive us. So if he's not a deceiver, okay, what Descartes thinks that this means, among other things, is that since he is not a deceiver, he would not allow you to be incorrect when you have clear and distinct perceptions. So when you have clear and distinct perceptions, God guarantees that those will be true, because if they weren't, then he would basically be setting you up to make errors in judgment all the time. But God doesn't just build us to set us up to fail. That would contradict his goodness, his great goodness. So anyway, because he's perfectly good and therefore not a deceiver, you can count on and be guaranteed that clear and distinct perceptions must be true. Okay, so 7th premise. Since God is not a deceiver, when we have clear and distinct perceptions, they must be true. So since God's not a deceiver, whenever I have these clear and distinct perceptions, they have to be true. Okay? And like once again, just to kind of make sure we're all following the large argument here. Beginning at the beginning, there's the method of doubt, which allows you to doubt almost everything except for the fact that you know you exist as a mind because you're thinking. In your mind, there's ideas. One of them is the idea of God. Let's focus on that one idea. It's special because it's the idea of something infinite. Since it's the idea of something infinite, ask about where it came from. Well, it has to come from something that is also infinite to have enough reality to give you the idea. So that must mean that there actually is an infinite being, God, and that's why you have the idea of him. It's the only way you could. Okay, so afterwards he says, well, now we've proven God exists. What kind of being is God? Well, he's perfectly good. perfectly good, infinitely good. So if he is, and that's how he's known to be, then he's not a deceiver. So when God has been proven to exist, known to not be a deceiver, this means that if you have clear and distinct perceptions, those are going to turn out to be true. Because once again, if they weren't, that would be deceptive. But God would not want us to be wrong or deceived when we have perceptions that are just as clear and distinct as they could possibly be. So once again, just the current step of the argument is, if you have clear and distinct perceptions, trust them, they are true, and God provides for them being true because he doesn't want you to get those things wrong, because he's too good to allow that. Okay, so from here, we just have a couple of more critical premises and then the argument is done. So the 8th premise is coming out, and the 8th premise refers us to what is one of these clear and distinct perceptions that we do have. Well, one of the clear and distinct perceptions that he now calls out for special reference is that if two things can be clearly and distinctly understood as existing separately from each other, then those two things are actually separate in reality. Okay, so let me give you this here. One of my clear and distinct perceptions is that if two things can be clearly conceived of as existing separately, then in that case, they really are two separate things. Okay, so they're the 8th premise. One of the clear and distinct perceptions that we have is that if two things can be clearly conceived of as existing separately, if you can clearly basically imagine the two things existing in separation from each other, then that is really something to prove that they are separate in reality, okay? Let me give you an example of this. So right now on my wrist, you have a watch. It's actually a new watch I just got, but anyway, I have this wristwatch. Now, it's on my wrist right now, so I'm not separated from it at all. It's right there. It's attached to me. But, okay, can you imagine, it's not too hard, can you imagine me and this watch being separate? Like it's somewhere and I'm another place and we're not together. Can you imagine that? Can you clearly conceive of that or no? Okay, good. I would hope you can. It's not that difficult to imagine. In fact, look, watch, I'll just demonstrate. There we go. Now it's over there and I'm over here. We are separated. Did I really need to take it off though for you to be able to put that idea in your mind? No, it's something that you could clearly conceive of just by thinking of it, right? So the point here is that when you're able to conceive of two things existing separately, that means that they're not necessarily connected and that they are two independent things. That they are capable, therefore, of existing separately, and therefore they're not the same. I have like my pinky finger here. It's right there attached to me. But I can imagine me and the pinky finger, if a tragic accident happened, you know, something really unfortunate, if it got severed from my hand, then it would be somewhere and I would be in another place. I can imagine those things being separated. God forbid that that ever really happens, but I can imagine that clearly. So that means that I can exist separately from the finger, that we don't need each other for our existence, that we perhaps are connected for some time right now, but that we could exist separately, just like me and the watch, okay? Like the watch is on my body, but it doesn't have to be, and if it was separate from me, it could continue to exist, and so could I, separate. Okay, so let me read to you a little point here from the author on this exact claim. This is on page 550, let me get this here, 556 on the left column. He says here, first, I know that everything which I clearly and distinctly understand is capable of being created by God to correspond exactly with my understanding of it. Hence, the fact that I can clearly and distinctly understand one thing apart from another is enough to make me certain that the two things are distinct, since they are capable of being separated, at least by God. So some things are easy to separate from each other, like me and the watch. That would be no big problem. Imagine you had like a glass of salt water. Now, there's salt that's mingled together with the water itself. It might be a little hard for you to disentangle those two things, but of course, it's conceivable. If you had a desalinization kit, then you could boil the water, collect the condensation from it, separate it out from the salt content, and then you would have desalinized water. Now, the point is that God, who's almighty, who's all-powerful, if there's any way for you to even possibly imagine two things existing separately, then even if you're not currently able to separate the two things, God could affect the separation of them, if it's even in the realm of possibility. Okay, so a lot of discussion here, but I really just want to come back to a simple point. When you look at premise 8, all it is saying is that it's clear that if two things could be understood in the mind existing separately, then in reality, they could also exist separately, even if they happen to have some connection for the time being. Okay, now, this brings us then to some of the last steps of the argument. We've really gotten to the end. Here comes premise 9. Premise 9 says that I can clearly and distinctly conceive of blank existing separately from blank. Now remember, the ultimate conclusion of the argument is going to be dualism, that the mind and the body are two different things. So what do you think is this point he makes on premise 9, that I can actually clearly conceive of this existing separately from that? What do you think is the clearly conceivable separate existences that he's talking about here? That we are able to clearly think of, or imagine at least, the separation of these two types of things. What do you believe it is going to be? Anybody? So we've gotten so far in the argument to say that if two things can be clearly understood existing separately, God makes sure that they really could exist separately. Now, it appears, according to the method of doubt, that you can imagine the separate existence of your what and your what. Let's see what you can tell me. The body and mind. Very good. Yes, exactly, Anthony, and also Senna. So that's the 9th premise. I can clearly conceive of So I'm now drawing this horizontal line, and the horizontal line would be the thing that divides all the premises listed above from the conclusion. And here is our ultimate conclusion, the outcome of the argument, the final bottom line. And that is that since I can clearly conceive of my mind and body existing separately, what follows from that? According to the 8th premise, when two things can be understood as existing separately, this means that they really are what? The conclusion then would be that because I can conceive of the mind and the body existing separately, since I can conceive of this, it therefore follows that what about the body and mind? I just want to see if you can deduce this conclusion one time. That they are two separate things. Yes, so therefore, the mind and the body are two separate things. And that is dualism. That's all that dualism says, that the mind and the body are not the same thing, but that they're two different things. So let's talk quickly about premise 9. What premise 9 just says is that you can clearly conceive of the mind existing separately from the body. Now, the method of doubt has already led to this ability to think of the mind and the body existing separately. Because in the method of doubt, right, doesn't Descartes say that who even knows if right now you're dreaming? If you're dreaming right now, then maybe even the body that you think you've got is itself part of the dream. So the body's existence is subject to doubts, but the existence of the mind, which is thinking all these thoughts, is not subject to doubt. Well, that means that it's within the realm of possibility, even now, that you don't even have a body and that you are only a mind, even at this moment. So since you can imagine a situation where your body doesn't exist, but your mind does exist, since you can imagine that and it's clear to imagine that, God ensures that the two things really are separate, because God would not allow for your clear and distinct perceptions to be false. And this is one of your clear and distinct perceptions, that the mind and the body can be clearly understood as existing separate from each other. To give you maybe other windows into the concept of thinking of your mind existing separate from your body, okay, think of dying. If you were to die and you believe that you have a soul that goes to the afterlife, then the thought you're having of the soul like going to heaven while your body decomposes back on the earth, that would be the idea that he thinks is clear, that you can conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. You can imagine your consciousness continuing on without the existence of the physical body that you currently now have. And just like me and this wristwatch, we're connected for now, but I can imagine and even give an example of me and the watch being separate. Now your mind, your soul is basically the way that he talks about mind. Your soul and your body happen to be related to each other, mingled together. But what Descartes is saying is that though they happen to be connected for the time being, we can clearly conceive of them existing separately, and God can and will separate the two things after your life in the mortal time that you have is over with. So imagining like a person who's died and now the ghost is floating out the body and seeing them on the operating table or whatever, the ability to imagine such scenarios as these, or the ability to imagine scenarios where the entire physical reality is itself a dream and your mind is just dreaming the dream. These are the ways in which he thinks it's clearly conceivable that the mind can exist separate from the body. So it's really an argument based on conceivability, what you are able to conceive, or as you could call it, imagine. You can clearly imagine the separation of mind and body. And since God would not want you to be incorrect about the clear and distinct perceptions, it thus follows that these are truly separable. And I'll read a little more from page 556 where he expands on the point. So he says, simply by knowing that I exist and seeing at the same time that absolutely nothing else belongs to my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing, I can infer correctly that my essence consists solely in the fact that I am a thinking thing. It is true that I may have a body that is very closely connected to me, but nevertheless, on the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am simply a thinking thing with no extension, and on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of body, and this is simply an extended, non-thinking thing. And accordingly, it is certain that I am really distinct from my body and I can exist without it. Okay, so that is his argument for dualism. Just a big recap one last time. Starting off with the method of doubt, almost everything can be doubted but one thing. That is that you exist as a mind because you are thinking. Well, in the mind there are ideas. Let's focus on one of them, which is unique. It's the idea of God. This idea of God is the idea of an infinite being. And since it is, it has to be caused by some external cause, which is itself at least infinite. So since the cause of our idea of God has to be something infinite, the only thing that it could be is God, the infinite being. So God exists. If God exists, which he thinks he's now proven, that means that he's perfectly good. And that would imply that when you have a clear and distinct perception, they're guaranteed to be true. Otherwise, God would be a deceiver, but he's not. So clear and distinct perceptions must be true. One of those is that if two things can be clearly understood in the mind as existing separately, then they are actually two separate things in reality, because at least God could separate them. Well, the mind and the body can be clearly conceived of as existing separately. Consider the method of doubt itself, which holds this possibility to exist. So since you can clearly conceive of the mind existing without the body, and vice versa, this means that they're really two different things. And that is the conclusion of dualism right there. So for Descartes, the proof of God's existence is an essential element of getting us to this dualist conclusion. If you didn't agree with the steps of the argument involved where he thinks he has proven that God exists, then you would not be able to follow it through to the conclusion, because it's only God acting as the guarantee that clear and distinct perceptions are true, which gives us the logical leverage he thinks he has to establish that since we clearly can imagine our mind and body existing separately, they must really be so. And there's just a little more I wanted to tell you guys about this Descartes material. There's a few other things that he thinks that clear and distinct perceptions also show us to be true. Like, for example, he says that the existence of the external world and all the things that appear to exist within it, now he believes he's in a position to affirm that they actually are real. At the beginning of the meditations, he said, I'm not so sure because maybe I'm dreaming. But at the end now, in the sixth meditation, he's got this new ammo, which is he believes he's proven God exists and that God is this perfectly good non-deceiver. And so if that's true, now he believes he's able to resupply confidence in some of the beliefs that he initially doubted, because now he can understand that these are clear and distinct beliefs that the external world exists. I just naturally am led to have those. So God would have to be a trickster, a deceiver, if all this was fake, but he's not. And since we've now proven he exists and he is that good, we can step back from the brink of all these skeptical doubts and just take confidence in the immediately obvious things that we do perceive. He also gives us other reasons why it seems clear that the external world is not just our own mental construction, but something that is itself real. One of the reasons he gives for that is that we cannot simply perceive things in conformity with what we wish. If so, then we would never have an unpleasant experience, and we would only have pleasant experiences, right? So if you're having a big dream and you're the author of the dream, then you could just sort of manifest things into reality by wishing that they happen. So like you could just say right now, I'm going to win the lottery, and if I'm going to buy this ticket, it'll happen. Or if you're going to get into some kind of problem or accident, you could just be like, let's not let this happen, and it would simply not happen. But it looks like reality is not answering to your will. You also cannot perceive the things that you wish to perceive, which you would imagine if the external reality was just a dream or something, then you could simply conjure things up out of nowhere. Like right now, make it so that you see a squirrel right here on your left. You can think in your mind about the concept of the squirrel, but you won't literally see one on the table because it seems that the content of reality is not subjective. It's not something that you can simply order to perceive through an act of will, which gives further confidence that the external reality is itself something that exists even without your mind. So at the end of the meditations, he's telling us that there were some things that we doubted for a while, but now that we've taken this big, long, and winding arc back to common sense, aided by the proof that God exists, we can return to our everyday views about the world. But if we didn't have the ability to prove God exists, then according to Descartes, we would always remain in a state of doubt and skepticism, because according to his view, it's only the guarantee provided by the perfection of God that allows us to take confidence in the things that seem to be true to us anyway. Not everybody agrees with some elements of Descartes' argument here. There's been a lot of scholarship about that. But it's still an interesting argument. It's a powerful argument. And to be fair, most people, I believe, if you just ask them, are dualists, because most people will say they believe in the soul, they believe in the afterlife, and they believe there's more to their existence than just their mortal existence in their human embodiment. So is Descartes really that out there? If he is, you better worry, because if so, then you're calling doubt into your own perspective about the possibility of the soul surviving the death of the body. So, I mean, I always find that a little ironic. A student will read Descartes and be like, come on, there's no way that a mind could just exist while you're dreaming everything. But if you think that's impossible, that consciousness could survive or exist without the body, then you're also denying the possibility of the afterlife. So, be careful what you are criticizing when you criticize this man. Anyways, though, thanks, everybody. There'll be a little bit more. I'll just close this discussion on Friday, but we continue, and you'll just follow the syllabus in the next author then. Okay, guys, so I'm going to let you go for now. Happy Veterans Day. Have a great day, and we'll talk again on Friday. Okay? Bye-bye, everyone.